Welcome to Gardener's World. The vegetable garden is going through that slight in-between phase when the early crops like peas and broad beans and the first lettuces are going over, but later crops like pumpkins and sweet corn haven't really hit their stride yet. So you get these odd bits of ground that are left open. I've harvested some lettuce here. I haven't got plants ready to put in for next winter, but I don't want to waste it. And this is where green manure can be really useful. Green manure is simply a crop of some kind that you grow solely to enrich the ground. And at this time of year, there are some very quick ones that you can turn around in a couple of months, like red clover that I'm going to put in here. And very easy to say, just rake the ground over and sprinkle the seeds on. Clover seeds are small. There you go. Spread them like that, and then rake them in. And that is all you have to do. And that piece of ground is looked after and will be enriched for the next couple of months until I want to use it for a crop of my choice. On tonight's programme, Rachel discovers the secret life of plants and how they use scent in extraordinary ways. We visit a national collection of wisteria in Cumbria. And Nick Bailey offers some tips on transforming a neglected front garden. And we'll also be visiting the man who saved the dahlia. And I make a return trip to Dublin to revisit one of my gardening heroes. It's that time of year when you need to think about summer pruning. Now, summer pruning fruit is one thing, and we'll come to that in a few weeks' time. But certain spring flowering shrubs need pruning about now too. There are two types of spring flowering shrubs. Those that produce their flowers on new wood, and those that produce their flowers on old wood. So buddleias produce their flowers on new wood, which means you can cut them back as hard as you like in early spring. And then there are others, like Philadelphus or lilac, that produce their flowers on orchard beds. And you can see how this one has got all its flowers at a lower level because those are from spurs from wood grown last year. And this year's growth, the new growth, has got no flowers at all. But hopefully this will carry with the spurs that come off it in next year's flowers. And so I'll have them up here and they'll be glorious. So I don't need to prune that at all. However, the matching Philadelphus on this side is in front of an Amelanchier. And I don't want it to hide the Amelanchier. What I'm looking for is a lower shrub, still covered with flowers, but just at a different height, and I can prune it accordingly. In fact, there's an awful lot of growth down at the base, which is spreading across, covering that geranium, and I want to clear that away. I want a bit of free air around the bottom. When you're pruning to reshape, you can cut back to the base of a shoot. That will stimulate regrowth but will not bear any flowers next year. And if you want a clue to timing, when the last few flowers are fading, that's the very best time to cut. Okay, that's a better shape. And now I'm just going to tip it back a little bit. So if I remove some of this new growth, that should create side shoots to give me flowering. And you can see I'm never pruning in the middle between two leaves, just above a leaf, because otherwise this would just die back. And any tissue that dies back is much more prone to infection. I think that's going to create a shape that will suit this particular position really well and give me some flowers next year. Of course, we grow flowering shrubs because the flowers are beautiful and they're really good as part of a border. But also, lots of them have fabulous scent. And the mock orange, for example, can fill the evening air with a musky, rich fragrance. But that fragrance...
Meadow of 100 species of native plant is insects and their relationship with the environment.
It's extraordinary and very beautiful. So why did you want to create this rather than a more conventional garden?
I felt that Kent didn't have enough wildlife areas, and I'd like to try to achieve something of my own, which would have lots of insects in it. One of the things we wanted to do was to look at what was already growing in this little area of Kent, in a 10-kilometre square, and that would be the starting point for the sort of species we could have.
The more I look around me, the more I can see the more variety of plants and the fact that it's teeming with life. What exactly have you got growing here?
Well, things like the meadow sweet here, which is in bloom at the moment, and this is a white period, and then we're going to go into yellows and the purples from the knapweeds and thistles and so on. So there's a change every couple of weeks. It's like being in a different meadow.
An ever-changing scene.
Yes, and different insects to go with it.
Meadow is doing so well because of the way native insects are attracted to the native plants, an invisible way of communicating that's vital for the health of the ecosystem here.
Every plant in the world is giving off some kind of scents which are made up. A complex scent is made up of lots of volatile molecules which are evaporating into the air and are picked up by insects which are passing by, who then turn their attention if it's the right volatile for them. They're unique for every plant.
Well, they've certainly been heading towards this nettle.
Yes.
Humble though it is. What's on there?
Well, if we look on the underneath of these leaves here, we'll see a number of the aphids, and on some of the leaves we'll see some little predators as well.
Plants use volatiles to attract predators, rallying the troops to bring aphids under control. But although unwanted by many gardeners, aphids can bring benefits.
In the case of aphids, they're sucking the plant's sap and they're dribbling out some of that sticky honeydew onto the leaf surfaces. Now these are almost can be viewed as the sort of the garages which fuel the flight of all the other insects in this habitat. So if you're looking at the most important plants, they're the ones that support a good population of aphids.
So at this moment, all these plants in this meadow are giving off their own specific volatile.
So each of the 100 species have all got their own conversation going on with a group of insects and pulling them in one way or another.
I'll certainly never look at a nettle in the same way again.
No insects being drawn to these invisible volatiles. Pollen beetles are placed in a perspex arena into which clean air is sucked via 4 tubes at each corner. But the air flowing to the top right corner takes a detour via a jar of meadowsweet. So, will the pollen beetles sense the volatiles and head in the right direction?
Now, it must be said that we are outside and normally this would be done in a lab.
Right.
But you can get an idea as to how this is working, really. It's given a little bit of time for the air to come in from that bottle. And then we should start to see the beetles appear to be making a choice which accumulates them in that sector of the arena.
So how are they sensing the volatiles? They're definitely going that way.
Well, they are, yeah. Well, they have little sensilla on their antennae which are responding to these volatiles which make up the scent given off by the flower. And so when they detect that scent, they'll move towards it. Instead of walking in straight lines and walking quite quickly, they'll begin to turn and spend more time in that area. And they're sort of intensively looking for that plant. They know that it's there and they're looking for it.
How extraordinary. So how important is it for all of us to draw in native insects?
Well, I think it is important because I think otherwise we're at risk of losing some of them. Gardens like this have a valuable role to play. You might see a butterfly or something like that heading towards some non-native sort of yellow flower or something, but it won't be the right kind of chemicals in that nectar for it to produce its offspring. They really need to be provided with a native flowers.
So what should people perhaps be growing if they want something that's attractive, ornamental, as well as being obviously a native?
We've got bird's foot trefoil there, which is a food plant of some of the blue butterflies. I would definitely plant some of the inula over there. It is a food plant for quite a few moth species. If you want to grow wildflowers, try to scrape off the topsoil to a depth of 2 to 3 inches and then replant seed into that. You end up with that soil being able to support a great many species of our wildflowers, and mowing it for the first year or so, just like a lawn, but it won't kill the plants. They'll all be there, but they'll all have a chance of getting roots in and well established. Within 5 years you should have something quite interesting.
You are really tuned in to the detail. You spot the insects straight away, and you're sort of...
I mean, I would like to see kids encouraged to do things with insects, and there's a trend, I think, in the last 20 years for no, don't pick flowers and don't collect insects, it's because we'll lose them. Well, no, actually you gain people who are going to protect them in the future, and so I think we want to have more people being interested in insects and understanding the huge diversity we have here.
I do think that whole area is so fascinating because, of course, it's not just about pollination. Plants communicate with each other, and it seems over really mind-bogglingly distances too. Well, certainly I don't know a lot about how scent is produced, but I do know that I absolutely love the fragrance of sweet peas. And I can't really have too many of them under normal circumstances. And of course, this year, my son is getting married at the end of July, and we're growing sweet peas for the wedding. You can see they're all white. This is white supreme. So I'm trying to manage the picking of them so that we have pink sweet peas at the end of July. And there are 2 ways you can manage them. You can either pick regularly, and that will give you a regular but limited supply. Or you can do what we tend to do, which is to pick as many as you can, preferably all of them, about every 10 days. And that stimulates them to a massive reflowering. So for the wedding, what I want to do now is clear all our sweet peas. And then I'll do one more pick, and hopefully we'll fill the place with that fabulous fragrance. Finally, what I do when I pick sweet peas is carry a bucket of water with you, stick the sweet peas in as you go, and then when the bucket is full, you put it somewhere cool, and that means you don't have to deal with them, i.e. cut them to size and put them in vases until it suits you. You can do it much later in the day. I always try and have a succession of climbers in the garden. So now sweet peas are doing really well, and the rambling roses are just finishing, and then the late flowering clematis will follow on later. And preceding all of these were the wisteria. Now I've got 2 very young plants that I planted on the mountain, but back in May we went up to Cumbria to visit Fiona Butcher, who has a national collection of wonderful wisteria.
Have scent, big long droopy flowers, romance. They've got everything. There's nothing not to like. Opposite my mother-in-law's, there was a derelict cottage, and it was entirely purple, the whole thing. The wisteria grew up the front of the house, over the roof and down the other side, and it was just purple on it. It was fantastic. And that was it. I was just in love. End of story. I thought, I'm going to have one of these in the garden. I've got a national plant collection of around 40 different varieties and species of wisteria. My favourites are the double-flowered Wisteria floribunda Yeikokuru, and also Wisteria floribunda Kuchabini, and Wisteria floribunda Lawrence. and all of them at the right time. Pruning is everything. Any new green tendrils, cut them off, because otherwise you end up with a straggly plant. If you cut them, they produce lots of flowers on short bracts, which is what you want. Wisteria will take over the world unless you prune them. The garden it's not tiny, but it's not massive, especially in terms of wisteria. So my aim has always been to have smaller plants. I first saw a photograph of a bonsai wisteria in a bonsai book, and I just thought I'm going to have that by some means. So that was, and then I read more about air layering, and it kind of progressed from there. Air layering is a method of propagation whereby you're basically making a mature flowering plant from an existing branch. First of all, you cut round the bark with a knife, about an inch in length along the branch, and cut the outside of the bark off so you've got the inside of the bark showing. Then you coat that in rooting powder or rooting hormone, wrap it in moss and tie it up with string so you've got like a little moss parcel. You need to make sure that the moss is not too wet and not too dry, and it needs to be sphagnum moss because it encourages the small roots to grow. Air layering is better for producing a flowering plant quickly. You've got basically a mature flowering plant within 2 or 3 years. Then you tie very tightly some clear plastic around it, which keeps the moisture locked in, and then you cover it with either silver foil or black plastic to stop light getting in, so they will grow roots. You do it in June or July, just after flowering's finished. And that's it. Leave it for 10 months and ta-da, you have a plant. I couldn't believe it when it worked the first time. I could not believe it. I was like, yes. And that excitement when you see all the flower buds on something that you've created is just amazing. This is a Wisteria sinensis air layering taken in 2000 from the original purple house wisteria, as it shall now be known. It's got nice structure, nice clean line, trunk quite thick at the bottom after all this time, and it's been that shape ever since it was air layered. This is a good example of the real variety and difference between the types of wisteria. All of them can be used for bonsai. Probably shorter racemed ones are better for flowering. And as you can see, they look like small trees already because I've chosen part of the plant to air layer it from that's got tree-like structure instead of being, for instance, long and straight like this grafted plant and like this one. You can change the angle of planting to get more of a bonsai effect, so I might lean it over to the left or lean it over to the right to get more of a more bonsai feel to it. The pot will not grow as vigorously as one that's in the ground, so pruning just as and when really. Every 2 years you need to repot them, and sometimes it's a bit more often than that if the plant's particularly vigorous. You need to reduce the roots by half and try and make them quite flat so you haven't got a root ball at the bottom. They need to sit flat, and then repot it back in the same pot. Discovering air layering made me much more confident about growing wisteria in a small space, generally being able to have lots more wisteria than would otherwise be possible. I think, as with anything, experience gives you more confidence and you learn things that you can't do, but for me it's just great.
I do think that is the key to really enjoying gardening as much as possible, which is to try. Just try things out. It may not work, but you'll learn something, even if it's how not to do it, which can often be the most useful bit of knowledge you need. And sooner or later, you'll find that things will work. And then all kinds of possibilities come to the fore. That's so exciting. And I do think, certainly for myself, that it's the creative aspect of making a garden, of producing new plants, of reordering it, reshaping it, that is the most fulfilling. And last autumn, I went to visit Helen Dillon in Dublin. Now, Helen is the doyen of Irish gardening, and her garden at Sanford Road in Runnelly, in the outskirts of Dublin, is probably the most famous that has been created in Ireland in the last 50 years. But last year, she suddenly decided it was time to move. So, a few weeks ago, I went back to Dublin to see Helen and her new garden. Well, this is the right place. I'm in Monkstown, I'm by the sea, and her new garden. Oh, this is quite a surprise, because if it wasn't for the glimpse of some rather wonderful plants down there, it would be hard to credit that this is the new home. It is so different. Hello.
Hi.
Well, this is something.
It's probably a bit different.
It's certainly very, very different. But it's looking incredible.
It's a huge, exciting improvement. Instead of going on and on and on and maintaining, because it's not fun just maintaining.
No.
I've got rid of a lot of old memories, bad memories, plants have gone off. I've managed to throw all my problems out of the window.
That's fantastic.
Here.
That's fantastic.
Open the window and chuck them out.
The garden that Helen left behind was a rich tapestry made up of unusual and exotic plants collected over a lifetime. But moving to somewhere new has given her the chance to create a garden from scratch. We're sitting in a building site, and yet the garden is clearly coming into being. It's the creation as opposed to the maintenance.
Exactly. Wonderful. What am I going to do with it?
So have you deliberately downsized?
Now, you know I hate that word.
I said it.
It's just as me, it's the giving up on everything word. I'm not giving up. Okay, the size has changed, but the me hasn't changed. When I first gardened in that Sanford Road house 47 years ago or so, I couldn't take anything out because it seemed sacrilege. Now I've got tougher, but the plants I love a lot. It's terrible to say one's editing and deciding the whole time and one's giving marks to plants, but there are some plants I might have been a tiny bit bored with. Has that ever happened to you, Monty?
Yeah, all the time. And I don't feel any guilt about that at all.
And it just has to go, oh. Or I'd said, look, I've grown that for 30 years. Do I have to go on growing it? Answer, no.
In the 10 months leading up to the move, Helen gradually potted up her chosen few and looked after them on site. Where did you keep all these plants?
Well, originally I sort of corralled them up the far end with wire netting round. But really, I needed something more like Trump's wall around Mexico. Because builders, I'm not sure they understand plants, to tell the truth. I'm not sure they see plants.
But how well do you understand building work?
That is beautifully said, dear boy, beautifully said. Do not put plant in front of builder's foot. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because builder's foot doesn't see plant.
But the plants are soon to be bedded into new borders. We've talked about editing. What about things you just had to bring? You could not live without.
Well, actually, that's not looking good because it's been moved. But that is a spectacularly good and wonderful clematis. That's a particularly nice musifolia.
Right.
Musifolia. That's my favourite one. If you don't like cannas, they're a bit too...
I do like cannas. No, I do. I grow them. That is stupendous.
Oh, I love that.
And you've got that in a dustbin, have you?
It's in a dustbin, so I can move it in and out, but it has to go in. And I don't think... It says it'll only stand at 2 degrees of frost. Max. So I wouldn't risk it, because having waited 5 years for it to flower, I wouldn't risk it.
So
I'd
you
put
wait
it in the greenhouse.
5 years to put up that flower spike and then it dies?
Yeah. But that flower spike has been looking interesting for 3 or 4 months. Definitely interesting.
Lots of these plants here are exotic, special, rare,
You're very good.
if not rarefied. That's fabulous and that's fantastic, and you are associated.
But they don't have to be. They don't have to be like that.
What
don't
do
have
they
to be.
have to be?
No, they
What is it
don't.
you're
They
looking
have
for?
to be. I mean, why do I love that little daisy that everybody loves?
The Erigid.
It never stops flowering. It's no trouble. It looks after itself. It puts itself somewhere pretty, and you can come along and say, "Oh, how sweet," and walk on. You don't have to do anything at all. It plants itself on the top of the wall and flowers away. What more can you want?
Lots of alstroemerias.
Well, I think they're such good plants. And people sneer at them and say they're common and things, but they're terrific plants. If you get really good, really pretty colour, and you get a really tall one, people will buy these small little piggy ones, and the little piggy ones all fall over and never look good, but these, the bigger the better.
I guess you have to deadhead now, you do.
What I do is I yank it out. You see what that's had the top off anyway. I just pull it out by the root. Yank from the base, that's going to flower, I'm not going to do it there, that's going to flower, not going to... This is weak, it's never going to flower, so I might as well pull it out. It's only cluttering up the place, look. Cluttering up the place. This one's cluttering up the place, look, I want all that out. Because it's not doing any good, it's just blocking the others.
Most people will be terrified of damaging the plant.
One has got to be tough and bossy over plants. Because otherwise you sit there looking at a miserable thing and you think, oh, I wish it would look a bit better, or else you don't see it. Most people, if they don't like the plant, they don't see it. Therefore, it's not annoying them. You have to make yourself look and say, do I like that plant? And the answer with that pink one is I do like it.
I imagine it must be quite difficult for you to be tough and bossy.
That, I think, is a slightly edgy air to that comment.
I find this ongoing conversation with Helen both fascinating and a little bit disturbing, because I've often thought about what it would be like to leave Longmeadow, because I'm coming to that time of life where I'm starting to think about the future and how I'm going to manage. Helen has just moved forward and she's left the old behind, and it was clearly tough. And I like the idea of not saying farewell with a sort of heavy heart, but fare forward. Instead of mourning the past, building on it. And at any age, that is exhilarating. I think the best measure of inspiration is how much it makes you want to do something as a result of seeing it. And I came back from my trip to Dublin with loads of new ideas here at Longmeadow. And I shall certainly be going back as soon as Helen will have me to see how her ideas are developing. Now, coming up on the programme, we pay a visit so that we can now enjoy them in our gardens. And Joe visits Dungeness to see a garden made in about the most extreme conditions that can be imagined. But first, Nick Bailey shows us how to make a neglected front garden into a welcoming space.
Front gardens are the first thing that people see when they come to our property. Yet so many of us only invest our time and energy in our back gardens, meaning that the front garden's a little more than a transition space. And this front garden typifies that. This garden lacks structure and seasonal interest, and the plants are not well maintained. The path isn't wide enough for the wee bin, and the bin itself is really ugly, and the pots don't sit well together. But with a bit of DIY know-how and some clever planting, I can turn this space into a desirable front garden with year-round interest that will welcome people to the home. There's good reason why we should invest in our front gardens. First, like a book cover, it'll become more inviting and attract insects and songbirds to the front door. Second, a well-tended front garden can add value to your property and increase its curb appeal. And third, you'll be doing your bit to help with the issue of flooding. something that the RHS, with its Greening Great Britain campaign, is especially concerned about addressing. With this front garden, I want to start from a blank canvas, which means clearing the existing plants. Then, I'm going to reduce the size of the bed to make an accessible path for the wheelie bin. To really bring this garden back to life, I'm going to use a whole new palette of plants. And the idea with this particular range is it will give interest to this front garden 365 days of the year. Now, one of the key plants that I'm putting in is this rose. It's a flower carpet rose, ground covering. It goes from June to around about November time. Really good value, and it just keeps delivering. Some people tend to think that fuchsias can be a bit bold and brassy. I think this one is actually really elegant. It's a Fuchsia magellanica, and it's a form called hawk's head. It has these white, very simple and elegant pendulous flowers. This is Anamanthele, used to be called Stipa arundinacea. It's a fantastic grass, and it self-seeds around, which is one of the reasons I've chosen it. What I really like about it is come autumn time, it takes on brilliant burnished orange tones. And so Astrantias are brilliant border doers. Long season of interest, and those beautiful lime and white tones will tie in with the rest of the planting. You'll probably recognise this as Alchemilla mollis. It's incredibly easy to look after, plant it and leave it. It gently seeds around, and then in early summertime, again this beautiful citrus lime tone to the flowers, which helps to bring the whole scheme together. This is Azarum europaeum. It's a little woodland European native, and it likes to grow in half shade or dappled light, so it's going to be perfect scattered through the plants in the front of this border. I planted this border more densely than usual for two reasons. One, it means the garden will look great this year, and two, I've chosen so many self-seeding plants that if they get wiped out by some of the larger shrubs, they'll slowly find their own spots and thrive. This planting scheme costs around £260, but you don't have to buy them all in one go. And since your front garden will look fantastic for years to come, these plants are a worthwhile investment. With the flower bed complete, it's time to turn. It will also have its own green roof. I've bought this off-the-peg wheelie store that the bin can tuck away in. Now at the moment its colour's a bit bright, so I'm going to paint it a black so it helps it to disappear. And then I'm going to give it a green roof. I'm just going to use a basic horticultural grit, which will help the compost drain and make sure the plants establish well. And now it's ready for the compost. And it's worth firming the compost in well to all corners. Don't be tempted to pat it. Use your fingertips, and we'll just work it down nicely without overly compacting it. You know, I can't resist getting a plant for free, especially things like this Ophiopogon. You'll often find that you can split them before you even plant them. You can see that what's growing in here is two separate little plantlets, and there's one complete with roots ready to go. There's one more, and actually there's a bonus on the side here as well. And so that's 3 plants for the price of 1. As alternatives, you can also plant ferns or mat-forming species of sedum. Well, that's the wheelie bin, all but camouflaged, because of course it provides a habitat for wildlife, absorbs pollutants and produces oxygen. And with the range of plants in the front garden here, family and visitors are going to be guaranteed a warm welcome to this property.
The RHS campaign to improve our front gardens, Greening Great Britain, has been going strong and will continue to the end of this year. So if you want to get involved and take part, you can go to our website and get all the details. Now this is a really good pot. It's designed for bulbs and I had tulips in it. But if you've got a big expensive pot like this, you want to use it as much as possible. So I'm going to plant some more bulbs, but this time they're autumn flowering. And I've got two sorts, although they're very closely related. The first is an amarine, a cross between amaryllis and nerine. And the whole point of an amarine is it combines, just like the name, the two qualities of both bulbs. You have the vigour of an amaryllis and the elegance of a nerine. Well, so I am told, because I've never grown it before. And this is Amarine Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is a pale pink. And if you do want to plant this yourself, you do need to buy it this weekend and get on with it, because it's running a little bit tight on time to hit the peak flowering in early autumn. But the method is the same whether you do it in May or July. You need a pot and some crops in the bottom, because drainage is absolutely essential. I've already mixed up a gritty compost mix. Now, I often refer to a gritty mix. And essentially what that means is you buy a normal peat-free compost and then buy a bag of grit and mix them in equal volume. And that does well for almost all bulbs. So you end up with a mix that when you rub it together just falls through your hands. And if in doubt, better to make it more gritty than less. Because what you don't want is water retention. You want the water to pass almost straight through it. So put it in, and these bulbs, unlike many, should be planted shallowly. You want the surface of these above soil level. So that's about right. These are bulbs that do best as they bulk out. So you can plant them quite closely together. And if you're planting them in the ground, if you've got very well-drained soil, you don't want to move them. Let them become a tightly bound mass of bulb. And they do want as much sun as you can give them. So their snouts are appearing above the soil. I don't want to bury them completely. And I'm going to dress them with a bit of grit. We put grit on the top, partly to stop the splashing. When you water it, you can get the compost splashing up onto the foliage and even the flowers sometimes. But also, it means that you don't get capping, which is when the surface of the compost dries out and you water it and it bounces off. And it looks nice. I've also got some nerines, which I'm going to put into these smaller pots. So the same idea, same compost, not planted too deep. And we can put 3 in each. I'll do the 2 pots. This is Nerine flexuosa alba. White, spidery, elegant flowers. It's very tricky to grow here on our clay with our wet climate, which is why I'm going to put them into a pot. But if you've got sandy soil or it's chalky, free-draining, south-facing aspect, there's no reason why you can't grow them outside. That is killing a number of birds with one stone. For a start, I'm reusing pots. I'm getting maximum benefit from them. Secondly, I am growing something that I'd struggle to grow successfully in our wet clay. And thirdly, this is a new plant, certainly the amarine is anyway, which should give me a really good display come September and October when things are beginning to thin out a little. Of course, something that will still be going strong, I expect in September, will be the dahlias. I grow lots of dahlias, I love them. But many of these dahlia varieties that we now take for granted and happily grow in our gardens would not be available if it wasn't for the work of one man, David Brown, who for nearly 70 years has been collecting and propagating dahlia varieties which would have otherwise disappeared. And last summer, we went to visit him.
I love dahlias because they're so versatile. They give you a tremendous range of colour, size of flower, shape of flower. It just is a wonderful colourful flower for the garden, and flowers from July right the way until the first frost. And what more could you ask for? I was born into a dahlia nursery by my father, John Brown, and I suppose from about the age of 10, in about 1947, I began to take note of the different dahlias that my father grew. And I used to help my father prepare them for cutting for shows, and was very proud when our stands were awarded gold medals or trophies. When I came out of the army in '59, my father had sold the nursery, but I still maintained my interest in dahlias and was a member of the National Dahlia Society. I suddenly realized a lot of the dahlias that my father had grown had disappeared, and the classified directory issued by the National Dahlia Society in 1982 showed 700 varieties, and in 1966 it showed 4,000 varieties. So I felt that it was necessary to start collecting some of these old dahlias. This was the start of my collection, and by 1987 I'd amassed nearly 2,000 different cultivars. It was fun really in those days, collecting these old dahlias. So if I was driving along, I would run up a garden path quite often and ask the garden owner if I could have a tuber of a dahlia that was growing in their garden. And it was quite easy once I started to build up this collection. In 1996, the NCCPG, now Plant Heritage, came and inspected the collection, and it was registered as a national collection in the UK. As far as I know, it's the only national dahlia collection in existence. Unfortunately, I became unwell, and Winchester growers, who were bulb suppliers, came forward and purchased the collection, and it is looking very good at this moment. Good clean stock is the first criteria to a good dahlia growing. They like well-drained soil. Most important, I think, is to keep them well watered throughout the growing season. You need to also give them a foliar feed throughout the season to keep them vigorous and strong and healthy. Another important thing with dahlias is to keep them dead-headed so that you encourage more flowers, more growth. If you live in a frost area, you should lift your dahlias, clean off the soil, and store them in a frost-free, dry area. I love the old dahlias. They have a special part in my dahlia world because people have grown them for many, many years, and they were always evolving. I found a dahlia called Union Jack in a garden in 1980s that had been raised in 1883. This is part of our dahlia history, and it's most important that we don't lose sight of this. I think more people now are growing dahlias just for the garden and cut flower rather than exhibiting. I'm hoping that dahlias will maintain their rise in popularity. So I'm just happy to be part of the dahlia scene and have been for the last 70 or so years.
Well, if it wasn't for people like David, our gardens would be much, much less interesting places. We certainly need and should celebrate our plant heroes. And he's absolutely right about the need to deadhead dahlias. Dahlias are a plant that respond beautifully to regular deadheading. And if you do that, they will go on flowering till the first frost. And it can be a little confusing if you're not used to growing dahlias, which is a bud about to open and which is a flower that has just finished. But here's the clue. If you look at this, it's a tight, round cushion, a ball, and that is a bud. So don't cut that off. Whereas that has finished because it's long and tubular. That means that it's finished flowering. And when you do cut, always go right back down the length of the stem to the next leaf or shoot. Although sandy soil and light shade may be perfection for dahlias, the truth is they're very adaptable. They certainly thrive on the heavy clay here at Longmeadow. But there are certain gardens that are survive, let alone thrive. And Joe has been down to Dungeness in Kent to see a garden that exactly fits that bill.
Dungeness has one of the largest natural shingle beaches in Europe, which is extremely free draining, nutrient poor, and the winds rip right through here. So it's a very inhospitable place to grow plants. So I'm intrigued to see an award-winning garden that's positively thrived here. The garden is in a group of recently converted industrial buildings and it's been designed by Emily Earlham. So Emily, what did you set out to achieve with this garden?
This garden is very much part of a wider landscape, so we needed to create almost an installation, but we wanted to make something really intimate that felt like a garden for the people who live here.
But it is a very, weird industrial landscape. You've got the lighthouse, you've got these telegraph poles all over the place. It feels quite random, the whole area.
There's a real theme of found objects around here, so people bring things from the beach or create their own sculptures. So in a way, the garden has created a backdrop for these elements of Dungeness to carry on existing in this space.
It really is a very large plot, but you've just gardened this area near the house and the rest of it you left to grow wild. Was that a conscious decision to have the two areas?
Well, actually it was a requirement. This is a site of special scientific interest, and so this area here we weren't allowed to garden. In fact, you can't even walk on it. It represents what the area of Dungeness would be like if nobody was walking around on the shingle.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the plants that grow there are a community that are undisturbed.
Okay.
It's very dry here in Dungeness. These plants have been chosen because they should survive in a very arid environment. Things like the Achillea, the Persicaria, the Santolina. There's yellow horn poppies that grow naturally around here, and they're very iconic around here. And also the Viper's bugloss, which is this blue purpley plant. And it grows everywhere. And so we picked up the purple and the yellow and we brought it in the garden.
So you've very much gone with the gravel theme, which Dungeness. It's got lots of gravel around here.
Well, some gravel is here, obviously, already. You have to only use the local gravel, so you can't bring gravel from other places.
But you can't just take it from the beach, you have to buy it in.
You have to buy it in, yes, and so we took it from the local quarry. And we made a dry riverbed type thing, so where the landforms come down and we create natural paths.
And the other material here is timber, which you use for decking and the furniture here, and that lovely bleached out effect.
There's lots of boats around, and they're all made of these kind of shipboard decking, and it's a bit like the boardwalk type deck at the beach. But we wanted to keep it really natural, so it felt like it tied in with what's around.
planting looks lovely from here. I mean, really melds together beautifully and works so well with the building and the environment. The Elaeagnus over there is a sort of in to create a microclimate inside so you can grow a wider variety of plants.
The Elaeagnus quicksilver has been really happy here, and it does stop the wind coming through. But the real wind, to be honest, comes from the sea, which comes straight across the garden. So there wasn't an awful lot we could do to cut off the wind.
The blue Amsonia, I've never grown it, but it's a real stunner. It works so well with the yellows.
I love this plant. I think it's really good. There's different forms, short forms and tall forms, and it does take a while to get going. It's a bit sluggish, but once it does, it's a real doer. It will grow in many places. It will grow in shade, and it seems to love it here. It's really enjoying itself.
And of course, there's sea kale all around us, but have you planted it, or have you just let it self-seed in the garden?
Well, it's protected, and we have introduced a couple more because actually it's a really great plant.
And those seed pods are really ornamental. As soon as you put that plant next to an ornamental plant, it does feel like very comfortable in a garden setting. I bet very few people grow it in their gardens.
Yeah, I think they should actually. It's got so many seasons to it. It starts off with this deep purpley red leaf that emerges, and then you get the glorious leaf colour and the flowers and then the seed pods, and it has structure all through the winter. It's a fabulous plant.
Okay, because I guess that would be one concern about this garden is, what does it look like for the rest of the year? Is there enough structure in this garden?
Yeah, it really does keep its structure. I think because the rainfall here is low, so the plants, the thing that kills the plants is damp roots, and so the structure here stays for a long time. It's got another life of its own in the winter.
Us have preconceptions about what a garden is, what we want from a space, and how it might perform. And if you turn up somewhere like this, well, you're going to get into trouble because you have to let the conditions dictate the garden. So if you're making a garden yourself, look for clues around you. Think about how you can relate to the wider landscape and bring them into the space too. And that way you could create a unique garden like Emily has for a very special place like this.
I guess the nearest that Longmeadow remotely gets to Dungeness is here in the Dry Garden, but it is pretty remote because Dungeness is a unique place. I went for the first time last November. That November day was cold, bright and clear. So let's see what this weekend's weather holds in store for us gardeners.
Hello. Well, quite a deluge we had yesterday across the south. What weather advice can I give you for the next few days? Well, there's not much rain in the forecast. There's going to be a lot of dry weather around, so perhaps a perfect opportunity to cut the grass in the garden. But mind, we have to sort of wait till it dries out a little bit in the south because it has been so wet in the last day or so. Wednesday was, of course, dry. Thursday is looking absolutely fine as well. Just a couple of showers, maybe at least a risk of in the south, when you can never rely on the showers. They could be almost anywhere. But overall, it is looking mostly dry across the UK. There is a weak weather front approaching at this stage, so this is 3 in the afternoon on Thursday. Northern Ireland and the Western Isles, so perhaps here a greater chance of some rain. But really, most of the UK is looking dry with just a bit of fair weather cloud developing on Thursday, and quite warm wherever you are. Even in the north, temperatures will be in the low 20s, around 22 or 3 degrees in London. Now this is Thursday evening into the early hours of Friday, so you can see just a couple of showers across the north, dry pretty much in the south. City temperatures will be around 12, 14 degrees. Rural spots will be fresher than that. And then on Friday, it's another fine day. But what we are going to find later on in the afternoon is clouds increasing. And actually the weekend is looking pretty overcast, humid, but quite warm. Bye-bye.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to get out there and fit in a few jobs. So here are some ideas of things that you could be getting on with. As soon as your delphiniums have finished flowering, cut them hard back, right to the ground. And this will encourage fresh growth that should carry new flowers later in summer. I think no summer fruit is better than a delicious raspberry, but they don't ripen at the same time. So it's important to go through them every few days, harvesting those that are ready rather than waiting for them all to ripen together. If, like me, you started growing some potatoes in a bag last March, they should now be ready to harvest. Take off the top growth, tip all the compost out into a barrow or a container, and rummage through it, gathering up your golden harvest. I always harvest the first new potatoes, and this is a variety called Orla, round about my birthday. A little bit late this year. However, I will eat these tonight and celebrate, if not my birthday, then summer in all its glory. But no more time to do so today. But we will be back next Wednesday at 9 o'clock. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
That is not a potato, Nige.